with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, July 29th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Ann Kim, contributing editor at Washington Monthly Magazine, author of Poverty for Profit: How Corporations Get Rich Off America's Poor. Also on the program today, Harris sees her favorability numbers are up. Meanwhile, Trump and Vance is down in the wake of the RNC assassination attempts and Biden stepping aside. Harris campaign signs up 170,000 volunteers and raises $200 million in a week. And it's off to the races as tea leaves being read and pushed for Harris's positions on immigration, crypto, medical debt, Lena Khan, and Israel. Meanwhile, Biden administration announces plan to reform the Supreme Court and propose a constitutional amendment that presidents have to abide by the law. In the wake of rocket fire in occupied and annexed Golan Heights, it killed at least 12 Druze children, fears of escalation and Israel attack on Lebanon. Netanyahu's visit turns out to have even Biden officials beginning to admit that Bibi wants no end to the Gaza assault. This after video shows Israel methodically blowing up a major Gazan water supply facility. Russian offensive gains ground in the Donbass. The Iowa abortion ban takes effect today. Maduro declares election victory in Venezuela amidst questions over that election's transparency. Trump White House apparently was also warned that harsh Venezuelan sanctions would fuel immigration. Surprise, surprise. We had four of the hottest days ever last week. And rest in peace, Louis Lapham, former editor of Harper's Magazine. Back in the day, was a relatively frequent guest on this program. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Fun Day Monday.
Fun Day Monday.
Yes.
I mean, there's nothing more really particularly fun about Mondays with us, but it's just a way of like
manifesting it.
It's fun when there's been like JD Vance embarrassment over the weekend and you're kind of waiting to talk about it.
Yeah, that's the fun part for today. Not some of those other headlines, but this part is undoubtedly fun.
Miller Times says the Discord's asking what you told Matt at the beginning of the show. I put a sound clip in our Slack, and I just wanted to make sure you had it as a drop. You'll hear it later. Let me just also read this one. I recommend you to read Louis Lapham's obituary in the New York Times. We will dig into our vault and see if we have some good interviews with him. I was on, I think I've mentioned this panel I was on with him, with John Conyers and Elizabeth Holtzman and Lapham and Chris Hedges, and maybe one or two others at Town Hall in New York over impeachment regarding George W. Bush. I mean, Lapham was really quite an interesting fellow. He, this from the New York Times obit. Some readers of this is of the Harpers saw a contradiction in Mr. Lapham's affluent life and his stalwart liberalism. He was very wealthy, came from a very wealthy family. And I would say he was arguably to the left of liberalism. I mean, it had a different sort of connotation back then. But he said he made his choice soon after graduating from Yale when he applied for a job with the CIA, then a bastion of Ivy League elitism. The first question he was asked, he said, was, quote, when standing on the 13th tee at the National Golf Links in Southampton, which club does one take from the bag? Quote, they wanted to make sure you were of the right sort, he explained. He found the question off-putting and dropped his spy ambitions for a career in journalism, although he said he knew the answer, a 7-iron. And the reason why I found that, I mean, there's a lot of things to be pulled out of this quote in this, in terms of Louis Lapham, but tell me again about cancel culture.
Yeah.
This is the point. You did not have the opportunity to make it onto the schedule to get canceled back in the day. You were canceled. You were never scheduled. So they didn't need cancel culture because the schedulers, to extend the metaphor, were the same people who had the power to cancel you.
Yeah, you can't cancel something that was never commissioned.
Exactly. But let's get on to more pressing things. But we will return to maybe Lapham in another day. First of all, the last 2 weeks were probably the most dramatic 2 weeks in politics that I can recall. I mean, we've had,
It's been 1 week since Biden dropped out.
It's
Harris has been in
week.
the race for 1 week.
And 2 weeks ago, Saturday, there was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump.
Who? Oh,
Yeah, that one.
I forgot about that.
His ear is healed, though. But what is perhaps even more stunning than those things that took place is what's on the other side of it. We'll get to the polls that show Harris's approval rating raising. Like I think we had talked about, one thing to have a hypothetical candidate, it's another when they start to campaign.
Yep.
But what I am shocked by is, and we'll talk more specifically about the numbers, Donald Trump's approval rating dropping. And J.D. Vance's approval rating, like, to be introduced to the country, even Sarah Palin didn't go through something this dramatic. And
She was liked, wasn't she?
Liked
she
by
was
the
liked
base.
by the Republicans. She doesn't need to be liked
Right.
by anybody.
Right.
Right.
I mean, he's getting in fights, he's getting in fights with the Barstool Sports guys. We'll get into that. Emma had a great tweet about this. But imagine going on to Fox News, who incidentally, like, Murdoch has set up his whole estate to make sure that the most right wing of his members of his kids gets Fox. Apparently relentlessly going after Kamala Harris in Australia as a way of sort of testing out, she laughs a lot stuff, memes. But this is Fox News. And here's Trey Gowdy. This is the way that he introduces
An interview.
with Senator J.D. Vance.
With the potential VP, not like an introduction into a segment where they would be talking about J.D. Vance journalistically in a critical manner. This is how he sets up how he's about to speak to J.D. I mean, that's what just is astonishing, but yeah.
I've watched that interview many times, and you should too, in full, and draw your own conclusions. When that interview surfaced, two things leapt to my mind. Those of us who talk for a living make mistakes. We say things that in hindsight...
Pause it
we
for a
might
second.
phrase
He's referring
differently.
to an interview which we played there where he referred to, these politicians as cat ladies.
Childless cat ladies, and that's why they're so miserable, is because all of these women put their career first in the Democrat Party, and that's why they're trying to ruin the country, because they're unhappy.
Yep.
Or better, or not at all. And then I thought about a stormy day at Reagan National Airport where I met two women desperately trying to get home to South America. I was trying to get home to South Carolina. We spent the whole day together, finally making it to Charlotte, and then somehow we got them on a flight to Houston. They were headed to visit family in South America before returning to their new home called America. And when we parted ways, they said they'd like to pray for me as their way of saying thanks for the day spent together. And I assured them it's too late to help me. But I do have a friend who's expecting, and she got some tough news about her unborn child. Would they please pray for her instead? And they did, and they still do to this day. They're Catholic nuns, childless, dedicated to God, love this country, living lives of service to others. And it's not just Catholic nuns. Some of the finest people I know don't have children. Teachers and guidance counselors and lawyers and doctors, and they love other people's children enough to teach and guide and protect and minister to them. Some people choose not to have children. Others desperately want them, but they can't. In a moment, we'll speak with Senator J.D. Vance.
What? There you go. That's the way he intros an interview. This is not just an editorial where he's not going to he is setting up. I mean, it is the perspective that you have if you're watching this show, and J.D. Vance comes on after Trey Gowdy has taken essentially it's like the pulling the goalie, or like half of the defense staying on the sideline, right, as he just runs down the field. Yep. And J.D. Vance gets brought on, and he starts basically playing defense on his own 5-yard line.
And he also is a Catholic, J.D. Vance, converted to Catholicism as a part of this kind of new right populism that he's trying to brand himself as. And Leonard Leo and other hardcore Catholics like Josh Hawley are trying to reclaim this kind of very religiously conservative Catholic. I mean, this is what appeals to the Republican base, but regular people are seeing it and they think it's weird. We'll get to that later. But the interview, this is how he goes into this interview with Vance.
So nuns and priests aside, do you agree that there are people who very much love this country and are invested in its future, but they also happen to be childless?
Oh, of course I believe that, Trey. And if you look at the full context of what I said, it's very clear the Democrats have tried to take this thing out of context and blow it out of proportion, which is what they always do, Trey, because they don't have an agenda to run on themselves. And if you look at what the American people are most concerned about, Trey, it's not an out-of-context quip that I made 3 years ago. It's the fact that Kamala Harris, the border czar, opened the American southern border. It's the fact that the Democratic Party has become explicitly anti-family in some of their policies. In fact, you just heard Kamala Harris in a Surface clip recently talk about how it was a bad idea to have kids because of climate change anxiety. So really what I'm trying to get at here, Trey, is that it's important for us to be pro-family as a country. Of course, for a whole host of reasons, it's not going to work out for some people. We should pray for those people and, of course, have sympathy for them. I still think that means we should be pro-family, generally speaking, as a party. And I think that our country has become particularly hard for parents, especially under the policies of Kamala Harris.
I mean, pretty hard to make that argument that Trey spent 4 minutes on an intro for your interview when you didn't actually say anything like that. And we have even more clips of him saying it, and we have right-wingers attacking him for saying, wait a second, why would you get special treatment if you have kids in this society? The idea, I mean, and people should understand that this isn't just about him. I mean, and again, we will, talk about the whole weird push. But the idea behind saying that you don't have the same stake in the country, that you shouldn't have the same amount of votes, that you shouldn't have the ability to be a leader of a country if you don't have a natural born child, right? Because, Kamala Harris has stepkids. This is like the root of nationalism and bigotry and this idea that you can't possibly care about other people and their future if they're not your offspring. They're not like genetically tied to you.
Right.
It opens the door for a lack of empathy. It opens the door for otherizing people. It opens the door. This is their way of, rehashing it doesn't take a village type of situation. This
it's all
is
about the nuclear family.
Anti-communalism.
Yep.
This is about the patriarchy. This is all of that is tied up into these issues for them.
And it's about Viktor Orban. It's about a style of politics that Republicans are trying to adopt that Trump has been very promotional of. It's like this bizarre natalism surrounding birth rates, and also about keeping women in the home in this kind of heterosexual traditional familial structure. Kamala Harris can't be really a woman that you can trust, because what is the value of a woman is if she's able to be a vessel for life. And that's how they view these things. And in the way that, like, we talked about this comparing it to Sarah Palin shored up the base for John McCain, who was perceived as too much of a maverick, too much of someone who worked with Democrats. And that was a way, he honestly didn't get blown out by Obama in 2008. This is just doubling down on the most alienating elements of the Republican base with the VP pick. And I think that's been part of why there's been such a strong reaction to it.
And like anything, J.D. Vance is saying what rich people once said about the failures of capitalism, blame it on cultural problems or blame it on the other. Whereas, like, why are people who aren't having kids but want them not having kids? 1/3 of them say finances. That is up 3 times from the previous generation. This is not a mystery, but instead we're going to blame. He started talking about Mexicans coming across the border, people, immigrants. Exactly. It's because that's fascism.
And later on, he said that Kamala Harris wanted to end the child tax credit. We can play that later as well in that interview. No. The entire Republican Party and Joe Manchin killed the extension of the expanded child tax credit.
J.D. Vance had the opportunity to expand, like, single-handedly. He could have voted for it.
But he did it. Well, actually, I guess he came in 2022, right? So
he's also anti-universal or federal health care, so or a daycare. So yeah, he's
lying.
I guess that was no, the child tax credit. Oh, right. It was of the summer of 2022.
So he's lying. He didn't have an opportunity to put that down on paper. But we know for a fact that Biden and Harris wanted the expanded child tax credit and were fighting for it.
And that's the one good thing about Vance. He supports that tax credit. But if you're willing to lie about your opponent supporting it, then can you really be trusted on it? I would say probably not, if that was my only data point.
And when the whole party that he is the VP of is against it and voted against it before he was in power.
It really is stunning. I mean, someone just IM'd that Chuck Schumer's out there going like, well, technically, Trump has the opportunity to drop J.D. Vance from the ticket because the Ohio ballot's not for another 10 days. The idea that you can get away, I mean, I don't think Donald Trump's going to do that. If he did, it would be disastrous for Trump. I mean, it's not like there's somebody else out there that people are like, oh, if Kristi Noem was on the ballot, then I would change my whole, and it would just reflect poorly on Trump having made such a disastrous decision.
Yeah.
Because it really is it's your first big decision as president is who your VP is going to be. But the idea that Chuck Schumer is able to even make that comment and have people not go like, what are you talking about? Is just a reflection of just how badly they messed this up. I'll tell you something. It is going to be a very, very uncomfortable Thanksgiving if Donald Trump does not win this election for his sons. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, they may need to make plans with
How awesome
Ivana.
would it be if they were completely written out of the will because of this?
I don't think they'll be seeing him on Thanksgiving if he loses.
But probably not if he won either. I mean, maybe for the show. Who knows? Folks, before in a moment, we're going to be talking to Ann Kim, contributing editor, Washington Monthly Magazine, author of Poverty for Profit, How Corporations Get Rich Off of America's Poor. First, a word from our sponsor. It is not hard to read about the recent studies on the benefits of fasting. Of course, there's weight loss, but there's mental and physical performance, gut health, and things like longevity. One of the reasons why people avoid fasting, however, is the whole not eating part. That's exactly why Prolon was created. Prolon is a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe they're fasting. Researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute, backed by leading U.S. medical centers, Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar, it supports cardiovascular health, and it can reduce abdominal fat, which, putting aside like any type of vanity, that abdominal fat is the one that is most problematic in terms of your organs. But Prolon isn't a diet. Prolon is science. It is science based on Nobel Prize winning discoveries in medicine. And it all starts with the Prolon's 5-day program. You get snacks, you get soups, you get beverages, all designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It is like fasting, but you get to eat food. And it's super easy to follow the program. It literally comes with 5 boxes, one for each day. I did this, I think it was in February. I was doing the show. So you can go back and I don't know, we can find those days maybe and see what my energy level was. My energy level was high. And I was not like, I had my kids that week too, or Saul anyways. And I thought like, why am I doing this? This is a mistake. I'm going to have headaches. I'm going to feel crappy. I'm not going to say it was easy, but it was not that hard. And I'll tell you, I've never looked forward to like a little chocolate crispy thing at the end of the day more than that. But I felt great during it and I was able to do it, which I got to say, I was surprised. I mean, this is unlike anything that you've ever experienced. My only experience with fasting was is Yom Kippur once a year, where you can't have any food. And I was, I am miserable by 3 p.m. The day of Yom Kippur. This, I lasted 5 days. And to be clear, you do eat, but it's all just sort of like this high nutrition food. So you don't eat that much. It is no wonder thousands of doctors now recommend Prolon to support a healthy blood sugar and cardiovascular health. Right now, Prolon's offering Majority Report listeners and viewers 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority. That's PROLON life.com/majority for this special offer. We'll put a link in the podcast and YouTube description. Check it out. Quick break. We'll be right back with Ann Kim, author of Poverty for Profit: How Corporations Get Rich, I should say, of America's Poor. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. Want to welcome to the program Ann Kim. She's contributing editor at Washington Monthly Magazine and author of Poverty for Profit: How Corporations Get Rich Off of America's Poor. Ann, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start with, as a way of sort of like introducing this concept that you can actually make money off of poverty. Let's start with Emmanuel Savas. This is where at least sort of, I don't know if you call this a neoliberal turn, but certainly the neoliberal ideology of the marketplace being a a more efficient provider of services, sort of like laid the, I guess, the intellectual groundwork for what we've seen in terms of privatization since that era.
Yeah, so Emmanuel Sabbas was a bureaucrat for New York City, and he came up with this idea that, he really popularized this idea that the private sector, anything the government can do, the private sector could do better, faster, cheaper. And he glommed onto this concept after a big snowstorm in New York City that resulted in a ton of snow and the public works department not doing a great job. So he decided he would experiment with hiring private garbage trucks to do the same thing. And voila, in his mind, the fact that some of the private garbage collectors did a good job meant that everything that government did could be privatized in the same fashion. And so he became really this evangelist for having government abdicate pretty much everything it can do. Ronald Reagan listened to what he had to say. And then this really took off with the Reagan presidency. During the 1980s, Reagan had 2 commissions to look into this idea of privatizing government services, turning things over to the private sector. And there were 2 giant reports, one in 84 and one in 1988. And these reports, one was the Commission on Cutting Fraud and Waste, and the other one was the Commission on Privatization, advocated turning over everything from like air traffic control, Medicare, Medicaid, prisons. And over the last 40 years, a lot of this has actually come to pass. And what's happened as a result of that is you have these gigantic markets for social services that for-profit companies have started swooping in and taking. Now, federal government spends about $900 billion a year on programs that disproportionately or directly impact low-income Americans. A lot of that is healthcare, which we can get into, but that also includes tax credits for working families, SNAP, formerly known as SNOOP, food stamps, housing subsidies, workforce training. All of that has become, each of those things has become a market in its own right because of what started with Ronald Reagan 40 years ago.
Okay, let's start with, I mean, you start, we just mentioned the child tax credit, for instance, just in another context. But let's start where you start. This is in Rogers, Arkansas, at a classic used car dealership / tax prep company, I guess, or store.
Yeah, so this has to do with the federal earned income tax credit, which is one of the federal government's largest anti-poverty programs. In 2022, it returned about $57 billion in tax credits to working families, mainly with kids.
Can you just explain for one moment, because I think people hear tax credits and they don't really understand that it's really like it's a payment. It's not. Right. I mean, refundable tax credit is a very weird way to say a government benefit, essentially.
Oh, that's right. I mean, we do a lot of social policy now through the tax code, and we call them credits because it is politically more palatable given the politics that we're in right now. So the earned income tax credit is exactly one of those credits you mentioned. You don't have to owe taxes in order to be eligible for the credit. So the refundable part means that even if you have no tax liabilities, cash comes into your pocket. And so
just the fact that we have to use that language is problematic, because all the people who support this thing have absolutely no idea what those words mean. I mean, it took me years to understand, wait, it's just a payment. Like calling it a refundable tax credit, right. It's a reverse tax, essentially, which is what is a government benefit. I mean, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, and it has something to do, it's a little digression here, but it has something to do with the politics of poverty, right? It is so steeped in our politics that the quote unquote deserving are the only ones who should get many benefits of any kind. So that's why we have to couch, all the benefits in terms of tax credits and make sure people are working. And that actually adds to the complexity of this particular program. And the complexity is what drives low-income people to have to go to paid tax preparers every year in order to get this benefit to which they are entitled. So this $57 billion that's up for grabs every year, that's an incredibly tempting market, for people who are car dealers, pawn shops, check cashers, they all want a chunk of this money. So what they do, a lot of them are like, just tax prep chains. You could actually just buy yourself a copy of TurboTax and set up a shop if you want to, because there are no regulations on who can be a tax preparer. So you have the chains like Liberty Tax or Jackson Hewitt. And then you've got these guys at Rogers Carmart who will prepare your taxes for you, but also sell you a used car. So when I gave them a call, and that's a chain, by the way, it's a big franchise of Carmart all across the country. And when I gave them a call, that's exactly what they offered to do. What they would charge me would have been about 15% of the average refund for American Family that year, about $2,200. So the fees would have been several $100. And then you go on their website and you can use the rest of your money to put a down payment on some awful used car that they had on their lot. And the idea behind all of these businesses is to capture every single dollar of that benefit that someone has coming to them. Now, the federal government actually went out and surveyed businesses that do this kind of thing. And they found shoe stores that will give you a free pair of shoes if you come in and do your taxes with them. Rent-to-own furniture places that'll offer you discounts on their furniture if you come in and do taxes with them. I mean, you got to admire the entrepreneurship, I guess. But the result is that the efficacy of this benefit is badly damaged by the fact that 10%, 15%, who knows how many billions are being siphoned off every year by these predatory companies that purport to offer service, but are in fact out to grab the dollars that people desperately need for rent, groceries, what have you.
I mean, look, if someone needs to buy a used car, they got to buy a used car. That's what you need to do. But it's the capturing of this 15% vig essentially on this benefit, and that is so incredible. There's there's really two or three different dynamics going on here too. You're also self-selecting people who don't have probably a certain financial literacy. Look, a ton of Americans have very little financial literacy over this stuff. I don't consider myself particularly financially literate either. But if you're going in and paying 15% of your government benefit, you're doing that because you can't figure it out and you're overwhelmed by it. So who knows what the loan is that they're taking out too for that used car? It's like, there's a certain self-selection or I should say, selection process that's going on there. What of the government, and just, to address this, and maybe we'll come back to it later. We'll come back to it later because I'm curious as to the new rollout of the government's tax prep program. We can talk about that at the end because let's move into another sort of like a section. So there's, whatever it is, $6 billion, I guess maybe close to $9 or $10 billion that are just basically going into the hands of people like at the car mart or whatnot to facilitate these people getting what they deserve from the government that we've already paid for, that is already being held against them in the ledger of our politics, as it were. Let's talk about job training. Let's start with international college because these for-profit colleges are sort of a hobby horse of mine. But then I want to talk about the Jobs Corps because I didn't realize there was a problem there too.
Yeah. So, the federal government has had a long history with job training programs that don't particularly work. So International College is a for-profit college, but is somehow eligible to receive federal job training dollars, despite the fact that it barely has any students. It's on a watch list with the Department of Education, and the classes that it offers are things like an online cake decorating class for several $1,000s. But the federal government, if you are, underemployed or unemployed, there's a program called the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act, which gives you a voucher to go get training. And you can use your voucher with so-called eligible training providers. And basically, again, it may not be that hard, depending on what state you're in, to become an eligible training provider. Clearly, it was not that hard for International College, given that their online cake baking class is the best that they have to offer. But they go through a process with the state to apply, they get on this list, and then voila, you can get federal training money from people who probably are going to get credentials that are not going to help them in the job market. And it's just yet another boondoggle for these for-profit training providers who are kind of fly-by-night. There's all sorts of odd medical certifications, schools that are out there. Some of it I'm sure is fine, welding class, okay. But the for-profit folks are charging many multiples of what it could cost you to get the same training at a community college.
And we should say this is different from the, sort of like, I know that if you look at any given for-profit university or college, something like anywhere from like 87% to 95% of every dollar that they make from their students comes from a government loan. And so, that ends up being the responsibility of the students, and they get into hock. But none of these private colleges, or very rarely from what I know, provide any type of data as to actually it being effective, either job training. And a lot of people go to the for-profit colleges because they're at a job. They feel like they can't get any further. There's a glass ceiling there, or maybe a lead ceiling, and they think they're going to get ahead. And there's no evidence necessarily that is the case. So that's a distinction I just want to make clear. But talk about so there's a failure of the government to sort of police who gets these job training dollars. But I also imagine, like, how could it be super profitable for a private enterprise to provide this type of training and also do it fairly? I mean, we get into that area of like, this is something that the government needs to do, because there is no market there if you're actually going to deliver this stuff in a legit fashion.
Yeah, and I think again, it's like a real failure of both governance and the marketplace. If you're one of these fly-by-night training providers, you're supplying something that's pretty substandard. You're charging the government to do it. If you're a for-profit, it's part of what you do. You get other students who are not coming in on WIOA money, the workforce investment money, but on the loan dollars that you're talking about. And then the lack of data, I think, that's out there really protects a lot of these for-profit providers, because when customers don't know what they're buying, then they don't know how bad it is and they cannot avoid the product. So this lack of transparency and the lack of data is responsible for a lot of the lack of accountability that you're talking about.
All right. So talk about the Job Corps. What is that? What is that program?
So the Job Corps started out like many programs with very good intentions. It was actually part of the original War on Poverty, founded in 1964 by Sergeant Shriver. And the idea was to have residential job training centers where you would have young people who need employment and education to go to kind of these centers, learn a skill, come back and get a job. So it's not really the right model for today, because a lot of these centers are out in rural parts of the country. They provide jobs for the people who work at the centers, but the results have been not great. There have been multiple government investigations into safety concerns. People aren't getting, well, there's a pretty horrendous 2018 report from the Department of Labor's Inspector General that found that a lot of the students who are going into Job Corps centers for training were coming back out and getting exactly the same job that they had when they left. But there's being counted as a success by the program. So there are many, many things that are going wrong here. The whole thing, however, has been privatized from the very start. The people who run the 100 or so Job Corps centers across the country, it's a cabal of about a half a dozen contractors who've literally held on to these contracts for decades. In fact, one of the companies actually boasts on his website that it was one of the original Job Corps contractors from back in the day. So the lack of competition, the breeds mediocrity, which breeds lack of results, which means a disservice to young people who are really looking to this program to get a head start in life. It's about a $1.7 billion program, and not that many kids actually these days are going to Job Corps. So when you look at the per child, per student cost, it's pretty high for the results that we're getting. And that's money that's not going to, say, apprenticeship programs that unions are sponsoring. Or, yeah.
Wait, is it, I mean, when you say like a failure of the market in terms of competition, like, is there a model where this can work? Because I'm not convinced. I mean, well, this is my point, is that like, we have government services that are delivered efficiently, that end up costing money, that they don't turn a profit. Like, is it possible that in some of these circumstances, or in many of them, I mean, as I read this, like, where this is just not a profitable business. So it's not a question of the market failing in terms of like, because there's no competition, but rather this is not, job training is not necessarily an industry in which you can make profit. And therefore, like, the only people you will attract in the private enterprise. Now, it's one thing to say like, okay, the government's going to run this and we're going to hire people from a staffing agency that may be expert at this or something like that. But it feels to me like there may be a problem with the idea that this is actually, there's room for profit to be made in these industries, and that the idea of a private marketplace within these industries is in and of itself a bad idea, just ill-conceived.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I mean, I think that there are some limited areas where the private sector can do a good job. Vance had it right with the garbage collection, for instance, or maybe some data management. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to human services, social services that require a significant amount of investment on the part of mission-driven professionals that really care about whether someone is improving their lives, you can't privatize that. There is no profit in that. Well, there is profit in that if you have contractors who are doing a bad job delivering that service to the government, but the result is going to be terrible for the low-income individuals who are involved in the program. That's the problem, that the government thinks that there's a market that does not exist, but that's enabled these for-profit companies to come on in and grab the profit that they can make by delivering shoddy services and really letting low-income Americans out to dry.
I just, when I hear these stories of privatization, I just remember Katrina and the story of the buses that I had read at the time was that that FEMA had subcontracted the buses so many times. They had hired a contractor who was subcontracted, who then subcontracted out. And at the end of that chain, the only way for that entity to make money was to not deploy the buses unless they were absolutely needed. And by the time you found out that they were absolutely needed, they couldn't get there. And so people couldn't evacuate. Whereas, the government says like, we can afford to lose money on this because our job is to get them out, not necessarily to make it profitable to have the buses take them out. And let's talk about medical stuff. Like the dentistry stories are just horror shows in terms of Medicaid.
Yeah. So dentistry and other Medicaid services that are provided through Medicaid are volume businesses. So we'll talk about dentistry in particular. I had the privilege, so to speak, of going to a dental clinic where the children, who are primarily the patients here, Medicaid covers preventive services for kids, but not so much for adults. And so all of these dental franchises are focused on providing preventive dental care for children. And they do it in a factory-like setting. So the clinic that I visited had, instead of like a one chair in the one examining room, they had about a half a dozen chairs arranged like spokes in a wheel. So they would have 6 patients, 6 kids at a time in these chairs being treated. And that was kind of the whole attitude of this volume-driven business. And what's happened is that there have been numerous federal prosecutions over the years of dentists who've performed unnecessary procedures on kids. So one dentist in North Carolina, he performed 17 root canals on a 3-year-old. He was prosecuted for that. In Colorado, they had to ban the use of what are called papoose boards, which are boards with Velcro restraints, because they were performing multiple unnecessary procedures on children, but the only way they could do that was to tie the kids down. So they could do multiple pulpotomies, taking out root canals basically, or crowns or fillings. There's just been so many abuses in the reason why this happens is because Medicaid doesn't pay that much. And there are a lot of reasons why mainstream dentists don't treat Medicaid patients. So what that has done is created a vacuum, which has allowed this kind of subset of dentistry chains, many of them owned by private equity, to kind of swoop in there and grab the market for themselves. And they discovered that they can make a profit through this volume model and through overbilling, fraud. The one chain that I went to go visit was owned by a company called Benevis, which a couple of years later settled with the federal government for $24 million for Medicaid fraud because they overbilled for procedures that were unnecessary on the children that they treated. And that's kind of typical.
How much of this is also this, maybe you can speak to how conscious or deliberate it is, but by people in government over the past few decades wanting government to work less not work as well for people, right? Where you have these kind of complicated hoops to go through, or you can even look at the Sam brought up the now direct filing system that was rolled out this year by the Biden administration for your taxes. Why did people have to pay TurboTax $150 for their state and federal returns prior to this, except to give the company a lot of money, but also to make people feel like, oh man, I've got to shell out money to pay my taxes instead of the government just giving me the tools to do so, for example.
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a really great point with this. You know, on the one hand, the conservative right is saying, oh, well, business can do things better than government can. And then on the other hand, what they're doing is using that to both shrink the size of government and, as you point out, to show how ineffective government is by forcing you to have to shell out money to have to deal with them. So it's like a multiple front war on government that the conservative right is waging with its tactics of privatization, but also attacks on government generally, and undermining the efficacy of government on so many levels. And I think social services, and especially when we're talking about low-income Americans, who are particularly vulnerable and particularly prone to be pawns in a lot of political debates that are racialized, that prey on kind of the worst instincts that we have toward who is deserving and not in this country. And the conservative right is using that as the wedge to undermine government more generally. I think you're absolutely right.
Right.
All right. Yeah. So I in terms of the Medicaid, how do you deal with that? Like, where is that problem happening? Like, what is the what creates that?
Yeah, that is a really complex question, actually. There's a broader problem with the privatization of Medicaid. So in about half of states, Medicaid is run by private for-profit insurance companies who get paid what's called capitated basis, like a set amount per patient. So basically you end up kind of rationing care. So that's happening in about half of states. So Iowa, for instance, did this back in 2015. And one thing that the auditors in Iowa discovered was that illegal denials of care rose by 900% in the years following the privatization of Medicaid. So one obvious solution would be to kind of stop the privatization train when it comes to Medicaid. When it comes to stuff like dentistry, when you have the providers that are in this space, it's not going to be enough just to raise the rates, unfortunately, because what will happen initially in something like dentistry is that the rates go up, the Medicaid dentists will just make more because you're not getting other dentists to come in there and provide the services. Community health centers, I think, is one option for providing quality care or better quality care to children who need it, probably in the dentistry space and others. But it's a really multifaceted problem that probably would take another 3 hours to talk about. But I think the first couple steps here are to stop the privatization where we can and to really take a hard look at why in certain sectors this is happening.
So, I mean, it sounds like the most direct solution is a Medicaid for all or a Medicare for all type of program where you would have to require dentists and medical providers to, at the very least, people can debate about whether you need to get rid of private insurance in this instance, but at the very least, you'd have to sort of require 80% of the people who walk through your door have to be enrolled or be paying through a Medicare for all or a Medicaid for all or a single payer healthcare program, so that you couldn't sort of sequester these groups of people and create a sort of factory business model for them.
Yeah, I mean, you got to fix the supply side. You're absolutely right. I mean, so long as you have Medicaid doctors and Medicaid dentists and that industry that does segregate the Medicaid patient population, you're never going to have a solution for the disparities that so many people face around this when it comes to healthcare.
Let's talk about, and we have this problem in dialysis, I guess, too.
Dialysis is, yeah. So I think about the poverty profiteers in kind of three big buckets. It's a chapter on each kind of industry, but they're the skimmers, and those are the EITC folks we're talking about. They're the monopolist contractors, and those are the Job Corps contractors we just discussed. And then this third category of opportunists, industries that make most of their money from persistent poverty and its consequences, such as kidney failure. And that's where dialysis comes in. The disproportionate number of people who have kidney failure in the United States are low income and or minority because of these decades of health disparities that we've been talking about. The vast majority of dialysis treatments given in the United States are provided by just two companies, the duopoly of Fresenius and DaVita. And just to give you an example of how much money were involved here, DaVita made about $12 billion in 2023, and 2/3 of that money came from Medicare. So the government actually pays for the vast majority of dialysis treatment in the United States. And again, these two companies have chased out or consolidated nonprofit providers. It's a volume business because the dialysis centers have chairs that need to be filled as often as possible. And they've been prosecuted for things like paying kidney doctors to send patients their way instead of perhaps referring them to life-saving transplants. 5-year survival rate for transplant, 90%. 5-year survival rate for being on dialysis, 40%. Where is the money though? Dialysis.
What's to prevent the U.S. government from setting up dialysis centers? I mean, this is one of those things where I would imagine there's not much of a difference in treatment between a dialysis center in one part of New York versus another part of New York. I mean, dialysis is dialysis. There's not a lot of moving part. I don't know if there's moving parts, but you get my
yeah.
There's not a lot of room for disparate levels of treatment in terms of the dialysis.
Well, actually, there can be. The SEIU has actually filed suit against dialysis providers in California, I think it's DaVita, for increasing the speed of the treatment disproportionately against minority patients, and thereby causing high blood pressure, heart problems, things like that. There was a complaint that was filed. And of course, the faster you do the treatment, the more patients you can have, right? So there are disparities in treatment. I think actually the solution here is not so much at the dialysis center level, but at the prevention of getting people on dialysis in the first place. We've got to fix the root problems that are leading to the trifecta of diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease that put so many people on the path to kidney failure. You can take away their patients and also provide the better care. But if we can fix those health disparities, you can sap the power of the duopolies in a much more effective way and really improve the quality of life, because you don't want to be on dialysis.
Well, I get that, but I mean, some people are, you have kidney cancer, and as you get older, you have one kidney and it becomes, and it fails. I mean, there's going to be dialysis on some level or another. It just seems like that is a perfect example, again, of you can have people who cut corners, but in terms of it seems to me there's a baseline of quality, and there's not much divergence above that baseline. Why couldn't government set up these centers?
Yeah, I mean, we have decided, though, as a country, that we're going to pay private dialysis providers through Medicare. That's the biggest obstacle.
All right. Well, let's touch on housing, because that's a big issue that is increasingly problematic in our society. Housing, we see another iteration of this, where we went from building public housing to essentially a voucher program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of like the dentists and in other places, now we have Section 8 landlords. And you can find YouTube videos, actually, of people who talk about how they can make a lot of money with Section 8 housing because, the payments are regular. There's a wait list because there's a shortage of affordable housing out there. There's one guy named Peter Harris who allegedly taped a series of lectures with Donald Trump for Trump University on commercial real estate. Had tips like, don't have garbage disposals or screen doors, just and that kind of tells you that the quality of housing provided by real estate management companies that specialize in affordable housing, Section 8 housing in this way, it's probably not the kind of, housing that you would want to live in typically. And the other problem is that we haven't managed to break concentrated poverty because, again, the landlords who are in this space pretty much concentrate themselves in low-income areas. And the purpose of vouchers was to try to help people move out of high poverty areas into areas that have a little bit more economic diversity. And that hasn't happened because of the capture of the marketplace, again, by for-profit providers that focus on this market, exploit it for all it's worth, provide subpar products, and treat the tenants poorly.
And what about, say, shelters, for example, as it relates to unhoused people? Is that in part, affected by some of this, I guess, planned inefficiency?
Yeah, I don't address the homeless, the unhoused population, and the solutions for them specifically in the book. I know New York City has had some serious problems with contracting with entities that are providing, or not providing housing for people who don't have it. There needs to be kind of a top to bottom reform of how we provide. We need to provide more affordable housing. We need to provide affordable housing in parts of the communities that are not just certain areas, but diffused throughout. We need to look at zoning. We need to look at land use. We need to be more generous in the amount of help that we give people, and we need to give a lot more people help because the percentage of low-income people who have access to subsidies, who are eligible for it, is minuscule compared to the need.
So what, in the end, in your mind, we have the policy prescriptions on some level, right? I mean, how do these changes happen? Because it seems to me like there has to be a change in an ideological framework for an administration to come in, let's say, and begin to make these changes within each of these silos. Like, it's not, it's conceivable that, somebody might wake up one day at an agency that oversees some of this and say, there's a more efficient way of doing this, but there seems to have to be an ideological change that goes away from, Reagan saying the most dangerous words in the English language are "I'm from the government, I'm here to help," to, frankly, Clinton and their initiative to make a leaner, meaner government. Because the idea that this shrinks government is also absurd. If you're wasting 10 to 15% on the earned income tax rate, you're not shrinking government. You're just basically, this is, this is what sort of like classical neoliberalism is. It's getting a hold and influencing the government to fund certain industries and certain players within, industries. What is the broad ideological change that has to happen, if that's what you think has to happen to make a wholesale change across the board?
Yeah, I mean, good luck trying to get any politician to embrace this, but the ideological change has to be an embrace of government again. We got to get off the privatization train that we've all been on for 40 years, not us on this call, but government in general. And this idea that government can't perform And I think that's been pounded into the citizens' heads for so many years that it's really difficult to come up with a message that's going to begin resonating. I do think that the direct file program that we've been talking about is one way to kind of demonstrate to American people that, look, the government can do something for you that is effective, efficient, will save you money, and get you the refund that you deserve. Unfortunately, that program only reached about 140,000 households last year. And
well, that was a pilot program, but now they're rolling it out for everybody, right?
They are, but the conservatives are trying to shut it down. And companies have actually spent tens of millions of dollars. ProPublica had a great investigation about the amount of money that Intuit and H&R Block have spent over the years to have legislation to block the IRS from providing either a direct file, and they've also opposed any sort of tax simplification, so to lessen the demand so that people can do their taxes on their own. So we're up against some pretty powerful forces here that are determined to keep these structures in place, shrink the government even more. Project 2025, by the way, has privatization practically on every other page about what they want to do. And they have horrific plans for slashing social services, handing more and more over to private sector. And so if they get their hands on government next year, we're going to see a lot more of what's happening than less. And so it could become even more difficult to turn things around if we're not careful this fall.
Ann Kim, contributing editor at Washington Monthly Magazine. The book is Poverty for Profit, How Corporations Get Rich Off of America's Poor. We didn't even talk about private prisons. We've talked about that in the past in general, both in terms of like the services that come into prisons and just the entire private prison racket. Nor did we reference, but I feel obligated to, the Chicago parking meters story from 2015. Which was also a prime example of just the horrible ideas behind privatization of these things. A really important book. Really appreciate it. We'll put a link to it at majority.fm.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program, wherein we will get on the bandwagon and mock JD Vance because it's just too fun. And we'll talk about these astonishing polling numbers. But we have a lot of other stories. This Israel blowing up this water treatment facility in Gaza. Israel has basically the spigots on the water and the power and that goes into Gaza. There have been, over the years, some facilities built largely to desalinate the water, I guess, because, whether it's salt water or, and apparently this facility was built by a Canadian NGO maybe 50 years ago, I think, but was also one of the places where Rachel Corrie, who was killed by an Israeli bulldozer while she was essentially, standing in protest from Israelis bulldozing homes in Gaza. Apparently, she was also in the month before she died, helping protect this facility from Israeli incursions there too. We'll talk more about that. Other things as well.
There's basically a lynch mob that just crossed into an Israeli prison, extremists trying to kill Palestinian prisoners. So last night, or I guess over the weekend, John Oliver had a segment on the West Bank, and he spoke about Gaza and didn't say the word genocide, I believe, but he did say how when we mean never again, we mean never again for anybody. And, I'm not sure what penetrates, but in terms of maybe there being some more mainstream liberal understanding of this issue, I thought Ta-Nehisi Coates was trying to do that in the fall. It didn't break through. Perhaps John Oliver makes it.
Hagai Matar of 972. In essence, soldiers are an open rebellion for their right to rape prisoners, and more coalition politicians are joining them from Likud, Jewish Power, and more. Context, Sid Timan has been acting as a torture camp for months. The testimonies of inmates, physicians, and soldiers who served there are horrifying. I would like the media that took so much of the sexual violence stuff from like Cyril Sandberg and those folks as license to continue a genocide to, be as serious about sexual violence now. I mean, this stuff was known for a long time and preceded October 7th, but.
We will talk about this and other things in the fun half. Don't forget, you can support this program by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get the fun half. You get the free show free of commercials. You get the fun half. You also help this show survive and thrive. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee and hot chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Eli from Ontario. Sam, can we get a shout out to Weed Chat? Peace and love. I don't know what that means,
Never heard
but
such a thing.
Don't know what that is.
All right, there it is.
Shout out, Weed Chat.
The Gaza Report with Sam Cedar. Here we fucking go again. There's somebody in our chat who really doesn't like us to report on Israel. I can only recommend quitting the show.
Yes, you don't need to listen.
Oh, please, I love this.
Anymore. You don't need to listen.
Become a member.
They must
They
be.
are. They're right.
If you're IMing, you've got to be a member, I
Pay
think.
pig.
I mean, it's also,
It's been nearly a year. I mean, it's.
Well, I don't know if it's that same person, although I have a feeling it is.
Oh.
But it is fascinating to me to watch people who support Israel, how much hearing stuff like this, like the idea. Now, it's true. If there was, and there may have been, I don't know, a mob of people in Hungary who were literally, I mean, you can see this on Twitter. I mean, like they're pushing down the gates to a prison that housed basically political prisoners, maybe some who've committed crimes.
Guantanamo type vibe.
Yeah. And, because they wanted to kill all the prisoners in there because that there are complaints that the prisoners are being raped. I don't know if we would report on it. I don't know that I would see it as much. But had I been raised to perceive Hungary as this uniquely situated place, so tied in with my identity, and had I visited Hungary, twice as a child, and it was the only place I visited in that region, and spent months there, and had it not been so closely tied to, members of my family, and also if it had a certain direct relationship to trillions of dollars and hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of lives that were lost there because of U.S. intervention and conflict, I suspect we would report on it.
Yes.
So
might be the thing that we should do if we're going to talk about the news.
You guys are so obsessed. Why are you so obsessed with it?
I know.
Kimberly Guilfoyle's Muppet mouth says, Sam, when will you disclose your ties to Big Gaza money?
Gosh. Don't you just mean Iran?
Ethereum.
Angela from Alberta, did you see the Spectator interview after the Paraguay versus Israel football soccer game yesterday?
I did,
we
yes. So good.
We have it, right? Yeah,
Yes.
we got it. We will do it. Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
Just radicalized that kid within 15 seconds of being around him.
It was amazing.
No politics. I'm just talking about the game to free Palestine in 20 seconds.
Yes.
Chris Burdick, didn't you go on your Hungary birthright trip? German is only 150 years old. Can you please reframe the story? Part of the content got lost in Sam's analogy, and I understand and I want to understand it fully.
No,
Which story?
we just go back and
Which
re-listen.
analogy?
I don't know. I don't know. To Hungary. We don't need to go through that again.
It should be obvious.
Yeah.
Emma.
On ESPN today, we are back. We will be talking about the Olympics. We'll talk a little bit about Israel's cold welcome at the Olympics, including some, like a wrestler in particular, refusing to wrestle against someone who was playing for Israel, just as an act of political protest. We'll talk a bit about the basketball as well. And also in some contract news, Tua and Jordan Love got these massive contracts that I think should be some red flags for teams. YouTube.com/ESPN show.
The Olympics were amazing yesterday. I have enjoyed watching basketball so much with seeing Anthony Edwards out there with the guys. I love it. Patreon.com/Left we talked about a Hal Draper piece written in 1950 about the importance of democracy. Hal Draper is socialist, also sort of opposed to both the McCarthyism in America and also the Stalinist repression in Moscow. So it's an interesting piece written at an interesting time on an important subject that is democracy. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half. 3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7-8?
Yes.
Hi, me? This me?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single frickin' day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go start one.
Libertarians. They're so stupid, though. Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him!
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
Call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the weak being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.